Layoffs don't just cut jobs. They start to cut into the trust and the psychological safety of your team. In this episode, I'm going to talk about how leaders can rebuild trust after a layoff. And there's 3 things that you got to do to make sure that you can sustain and build a great, thriving team culture. So when it comes to reductions in force, we've often seen a number of things like building the strategy, creating the plan, thinking of all the logistics that will be required to do this reduction in force. But what gets very little time, unfortunately, is the people side of layoffs. And particularly for the people who remain, how do you help strengthen psychological safety and trust for the betterment of the team culture, but also for performance? So here's what we have seen. The people who have been left behind, we often hear them referred to as survivors. They will start asking questions, whether to themselves or out loud, things like, am I next? Or does leadership really care about me? And all of this is coming from a source of both the emotions that people feel, this emotional fallout after layoffs, but it also speaks to the trauma that we don't often name or the grief. And if you want to maintain the culture that you've worked so hard to build, you've got to tend to the humans and the people who are left behind. This is where the real leadership and the real strategy has got to get kicked in. It's not planning the reduction in force, it's what you do after the fact. I'm Krista Wilson, and for the past 17 years, through my firm, Wilson & Associates Coaching and Consulting, I've helped organizations build psychologically safe, trust-rich, and high-performing teams. And this year, as we've seen a surge in layoffs, one of the things that are actively threatening team psychological safety and trust is what happens after reductions in force happen. We've got to think of these layoffs as a sort of trauma. And like trauma that happens in any other parts of our life, it needs to have a strategy. And so the managers who are left behind, they find themselves in these roles of what we call culture healers. They're responsible for repair because you can't have high-performing, psychologically safe team when there's grief and trauma after there's been a change in teaming, maybe a change in roles, and definitely a change of the composition of that team after a layoff. But here's why psychological safety and trust matter. So it's not just like a recovery strategy, like something you have to do to repair the harms that can come with a reduction in force. Building psychological safety and trust is actually what we call one of the foundations of great company culture. In fact, it's one of 12 elements of a great company culture out of a tool that we created, the periodic table of great culture elements. You can read about this element and the 11 other ones in our free Build a Great Company Culture Guide. And you can download it for free using the link in the video description. Now, when I talk about psychological safety and trust, people often understand that it's important, but what they may not know are what are the steps that they as a leader, as a people manager can do to repair team culture and to build trust after the layoffs. So I want to share with you 3 tips. The first step is we want to rebuild psychological safety. It's almost like not that it doesn't matter what happened before, but what you've got to focus on is what do I need to do today, tomorrow, the next week, and the week after to build and rebuild, psychological safety. Because it's the one thing that begins to erode when there's this reduction in force, especially if people didn't know it was coming. So what I often invite people to do, the leaders that we coach, is to create a space where they can speak honestly, invite employees to speak honestly, to disagree respectfully, to share how they're feeling, to name what they need, and to share new ideas for how to move forward without fear of retribution. So here's how you do it. First, you got to name what's real. Don't pretend everything's fine because people will look at you like you're lying. Instead, say something like this. Maybe this has been a tough season. People that we valued aren't here anymore. And I know that impacts us all. So that's one thing that you can offer. The second thing is we want to invite conversation instead of control. So many times leaders ask us, how do we address resistance when there's not buy-in, when there's pushback, when people are withdrawn? How do we essentially control and make people buy in? That's actually not a change management strategy. Now, the third thing that you can do to model psychological safety is model steadiness. when there are changes, and this happened to us when we worked with a major institution earlier this year, they were both doing a reduction in force, but also they had divisions that were merging. And the leaders felt uncomfortable, they were scared, they were concerned about the uncertainty, and many of them didn't agree with it. And so that energy was proving to be very disruptive for the well-being of the employees, right? We look to our leaders to give us guidance, to show us the way. And so when our leaders aren't steady, it makes the ground under your employees feel like it could crumble at any moment. Here's what I want to say that's really important about building psychological safety. You cannot just offer a 1-hour workshop to your people on the idea of psychological safety and think that that's going to build emotional and culture repair. You've got to actually roll your sleeves up and bring your own emotions and your own humanity into conversations. Create a safe space where people can actually share their ideas and their feelings without judgment or retribution. And this is how you start to build, repair, and tighten your team culture. Here's the second step. The second step for how you can repair your team culture after layoffs. You got to restore trust. Once people start feeling a little bit safer, you can begin to do the things that help people feel that they can believe in you and that you are of your word and the organization is of its word. What you probably know and what we've seen by so many interventions with mediation and conflict and toxic culture is that trust is fragile. It takes a while to build, but it can be disappeared in a moment. And after layoffs, people are watching your move and everybody else's move. There is a little bit of distrust or mistrust, and there is hesitancy. So then what do? If you know you need to restore trust, but you aren't sure, here's what you do. First, I want you to communicate early and often. Give short updates. The information that you think might not be important can still feel like a signpost on this journey of change, and it can reduce anxiety. If people feel that you're hiding secrets, if they feel like there's information, or maybe they've heard whispers and they're not hearing from you, that begins to erode trust. So don't do that. The thing that takes a lot of leadership vulnerability and is a really amazing tool in the trust building toolbox is to admit mistakes and to show care. A simple, and we've seen leaders and we've given them this line, and I have seen it fast forward relationship building and fast forward trust in a way that you wouldn't believe. Here's the phrase, a simple, we didn't get everything right. Or, I don't know if that was taken into consideration. I can see how that could be hurtful. This can restore so much credibility because people feel the vulnerability of you, someone in a leadership role, admitting that they've made a mistake. And I'll tell you, an imperfect truth telling and an imperfect admission of a mistake is worth more than a perfectly crafted statement. So in this instance, don't worry about perfection, worry about being true and making the human connection. So the takeaway from this note is if you want to rebuild trust, it isn't about being perfect, it's about being present. And this, matter of fact, is the people and culture aspect of change management, right? You're changing the team composition, you're changing maybe who's in roles or even the number of folks on a team. That change has been orchestrated, but the people and the culture and those who are left behind often don't get the same level of attention and management of that change effort. So this trust building is a place where you can go deep in that. Third step to repairing team culture after a layoff, how can you help the people who remain reconnect to a shared purpose? So once you've got safety and you've got trust and you see that beginning to return, your next focus has got to be, how can we reconnect the people who are here to our team purpose, what we're charged to do, and even the organization's purpose. So much study has come out, even from the Surgeon General nearly 3 years ago, last month, about how people need to feel a connection to the work. They have to be able to find meaning in the work in order for them to have high performance and to feel a level of psychological safety. So as a leader, that's part of your charge. And especially during disruption, employees can lose sight of why their work matters and why they matter and why they're needed. They're often just trying to survive the week. So you can reignite that spark of why they matter and why their work matters by bringing in a storytelling practice to help tap into a shared purpose. One thing that it's really critical is that you remind people how their role connects to the mission. And you want to celebrate progress. Celebrate the progress. Don't worry about doing everything perfectly. So every small win, everything that you can do to help people find purpose is proof that you're rebuilding something worth believing in. So for example, like some of our clients, perhaps that one small step is actually just having a retreat space to do just human connection. It's not about work, not about strategy, not about performance. It's just about connecting with who we are, what matters to us, and what gets us excited. If you do that, celebrate one check mark toward your progress to building a shared purpose and a new team culture with the survivors who were left behind. So here's some things I want you to walk away with if you're taking notes or you fast forwarded to the end, is that layoffs do create a cultural, almost scar tissue. But if you tend to it, you care for it, you use honesty and care, that scar can begin to lighten up, and you can actually make your culture and the relationships and the trust and the psychological safety even stronger than before the reduction in force. I think I want to make sure that I say that this isn't about toxic positivity or pep talks or offering perks, right? To build psychological safety and to build trust after an event like this is about being consistent, being transparent, having compassion for the multitude and myriad emotions that people are feeling, and to help give people a sense of purpose. And I'll tell you, when leaders commit to that, people start to believe in their leadership, in the organization, and even what they can contribute. And when psychological safety spikes and trust spikes, we know that innovation spikes. We also know that performance and productivity are on the incline as well. So if you're leading through this kind of change and you want a roadmap to build a healthy, resilient workplace and team culture, I want to make sure that you download our Build a Great Company Culture Guide. This thing walks you through all 12 elements that make workplaces thrive, including psychological safety and trust. You'll find the link in the description below. And meanwhile, I hope that you are able to build really healthy team cultures, whether you're in a layoff right now or not. These tactics are still great ones to help build a thriving team and organizational culture.